All right, so we're just going to do a couple examples of some things today. First is a little bit of review of factoring. And so we'll start with a level one problem. So remember, a level one factoring problem is a problem where there's a 1 out in front of the x squared. And in these problems, we can just do the diamond problem. The n number goes to the top. The middle number goes to the bottom. And so we're looking for things that multiply to 6 and add to 5. We can do our little scratch work if we need to. The only things that multiply to 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. And so we go with 2 and 3. And so we factor it to x plus 2 and x plus 3. And I think most people don't have too much trouble with those. The other thing that's going to show up as you're working on these problems in Chapter 10 is the GCF factoring. And so remember, the first thing you should do if you run into a factoring problem with something out in front of the x squared is check to see if you can take it out. So is there something that goes into all of these? And in this case, the 2 does. And so that 2 comes out, and then we're dividing by 2. So x squared is there because the 2 is gone. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And then we check to see if we can factor this. And of course, I picked it conveniently here. This is the problem we just did. So we know how that factors. And so the complete factoring of this original polynomial is 2 and then x plus 2 and x plus 3 in parentheses. All right, so that's sort of the review. What's the new thing? The new thing is algebraic fractions. And so algebraic fractions look like they sort of sound. They're fractions, but with x's in them. And it's sort of like reducing fractions. We're looking for things that are the same on the top and bottom, because if you have something on the top and you divide by that same thing, that creates a giant 1, we call it, right? X plus 3 divided by x plus 3 is 1. And when you're multiplying, you don't really need to write a 1. And so when we look for these things that are the same, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, we cancel those out. And we just write down what's left. And so in this case, we're left with x plus 1, or x plus 4 on top, sorry, I miswrote that bottom one, and x minus 1 on the bottom. And you have to stop here. The one thing that sometimes people do is they say, oh, there's an x on the top and the bottom, but you can't cross those out because they're sort of attached to the other numbers. And so x plus 4 is different than x minus 1, and so you can't cross those out. Sometimes you don't have one big fraction. Sometimes you have problems where there are sort of 2 fractions multiplied, but it's still the same idea. You're looking for things that are the same on top and bottom, and you cross them out. And it doesn't matter if they're in the same fraction or not. So in this case, there's an x plus 5 on top, x plus 5 on the bottom. Cross those out. X plus 3 is not the same as x minus 3, and so we can't cross those out. And sometimes I sort of like to put those parentheses around just to remind myself that that's a group, and you can't cancel out the group unless it's exactly the same. And so even though this has an x and a 3 and an x and a 3, the plus and minus make them different, and so we can't cross those out. Last piece, we'll sort of do one problem that puts 2 things in. The first is if you have something to factor, you should factor that first. So in this case, I see my old friend here, x squared plus 5x plus 6. And so I just did that problem, right? We know how that factors. And so the first thing I'm going to do is write down the factors. And so I'm writing those 2 down. I'm just copying everything else over. And now we're dividing fractions. And I think what some teachers like to call it is keep, change, flip. You maybe have heard that before. So I'm going to keep the first fraction the same. So just copy that down. I change dividing to multiplying. And then I flip the second fraction. And so I'm flipping that second one over. And again, I can put these parentheses around just to remind myself that it's a whole group. Now I look for anything that is the exact same on top and bottom, right? Top and bottom. And so the only thing I see is an x plus 2 on top, x plus 2 on the bottom. They cancel each other out, leave a giant 1. Everything else is left. Right? Can't do anything more with these things. And so this is my final simplified answer. So you'll have a little worksheet to practice these things. It's new stuff. Chapter 10 is sort of a tricky one. Takes some getting used to. We're looking for the same thing on top and bottom to cross out. Good luck on the worksheet.